The mist clung to the Carpathian Mountains like a shroud, thick and impenetrable, swallowing the narrow path that wound through ancient forests where even the wolves dared not howl. Elara pulled her cloak tighter against the biting wind, her fingers numb despite the wool gloves she wore. The village of Sigishora lay 3 days behind her now, and with each step forward, the warnings of the townsfolk echoed louder in her mind. They had begged her not to go. They had crossed themselves and whispered prayers when she mentioned the castle. They had called her foolish, reckless, cursed. But Elara had not traveled across half of Europe to turn back now. She was a woman of 30 years, unmarried by choice, devoted to a singular purpose that had consumed the last decade of her life. In the libraries of Prague, Vienna, and Budapest, she had traced fragments of a mystery that scholars dismissed as legend and priests condemned as heresy. The Codex of Eternal Night, a manuscript said to contain the true history of the undead and the rituals that bound them to this world, had been lost for centuries. But Elara had found references, breadcrumbs left in crumbling texts and forbidden collections. Every clue pointed here, to the castle that loomed somewhere beyond the mist, to the domain of the one they called the Dark Prince, the Impaler, the Count. The path grew steeper, and the trees pressed closer, their branches twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate, almost mocking. Elara's boots slipped on loose stones, and she caught herself against a gnarled trunk, its bark cold and damp beneath her palm. She had packed light, carrying only what was essential: a leather satchel containing her notes, a silver crucifix that had belonged to her mother, a small vial of holy water, and 2 days' worth of bread and dried meat. She had no illusions about what she was walking toward. The stories were clear enough. Vampires were real. The castle was cursed. Count Dracula, if he still existed in any form, was the most dangerous creature ever to walk the earth. But danger had never frightened Elara. Ignorance did. The unknown did. The thought that somewhere in the world, knowledge existed that could explain the inexplicable, and she might die without finding it. That was what drove her forward, even as her body begged for rest. The sun was sinking behind the mountains when she finally saw it. The castle rose from the cliffs like a broken tooth, its towers crumbling, its walls blackened by fire and time. No light shone in its windows, no smoke rose from its chimneys. It looked abandoned, forgotten, a relic of a darker age. But Elara knew better. Abandoned places did not inspire the kind of terror she had seen in the eyes of the villagers. Abandoned places did not make grown men weep and beg a stranger to turn back. She approached the main gate as twilight bled into night. The iron portcullis hung half-raised, rusted in place, and the wooden doors beyond stood ajar, one hanging askew on broken hinges. Elara hesitated for only a moment before stepping through. The courtyard was overgrown with thorny vines and dead flowers, their petals black and brittle. A fountain stood at its center, dry and cracked, stained with something that might have been rust or might have been blood. The air smelled of rot and old stone, and something else, something sweet and sickly that made her stomach turn. She crossed the courtyard slowly, every sense alert. The castle seemed empty, but she could feel it watching her. The windows were dark eyes. The doorways were open mouths. She climbed the steps to the main entrance and pushed open the heavy door. It swung inward without a sound, as if the hinges had been oiled recently, and that detail sent a chill down her spine. The entrance hall was vast and shadowed, illuminated only by the pale moonlight that filtered through gaps in the ceiling. Tapestries hung in tatters on the walls, depicting scenes of battle and bloodshed. A grand staircase swept upward into darkness, its banister carved with serpents and roses. Elara lit the lantern she had brought, its small flame pushing back the shadows just enough to see her footing. She had studied the few descriptions of the castle that existed in historical records. If those accounts were accurate, the library would be on the second floor, in the eastern wing. That was where she needed to go. She climbed the staircase carefully, testing each step before putting her full weight on it. The wood groaned beneath her, and dust rose in small clouds. At the top, a long corridor stretched in both directions. She turned east, following the faint pull of intuition and research. Doors lined the hallway, most of them closed, some hanging open to reveal rooms stripped bare or filled with debris. She passed a ballroom where chandeliers lay shattered on the floor. She passed a dining hall where the table was still set, plates and goblets coated in dust and cobwebs. And then she found it. A door at the end of the corridor, slightly larger than the others, with symbols carved into its frame. Alchemical signs, astrological markers, and something else. Something that looked like old Romanian script. Elara traced the symbols with her fingers, whispering the words she had memorized from her research. The door was unlocked. It opened with a soft creak and she stepped inside. The library was surprisingly intact. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with books and scrolls and loose parchments. A large desk sat near the window, its surface covered in more books, an inkwell dried to a black crust, and a candelabra holding the stubs of long-dead candles. Elara set her lantern on the desk and began to search. She worked methodically, running her fingers along spines, pulling out volumes that looked promising, checking the flyleaves for marks or annotations. Hours passed. The moon climbed higher in the sky. Her eyes burned from squinting in the dim light, but she did not stop. It was near midnight when she found it. Not the codex itself, but something just as valuable. A journal, leather-bound and locked with a small brass clasp. She pried it open carefully, and the first page made her heart race. The handwriting was elegant, precise, unmistakably old. The entries were in Latin, French, and Romanian, sometimes switching languages mid-sentence, and they were signed. V. Count Dracula. Elara sank into the chair at the desk, her hands trembling as she turned the pages. The journal was not a grimoire or a collection of spells. It was a confession, a record of sins and sorrows, written by a man who had stopped being a man centuries ago. He wrote of the transformation, of the bargain he had made in desperation and rage, of the first kill and the 1,000 that followed. He wrote of the emptiness, the hunger that could never be satisfied, the way humanity slipped away piece by piece until all that remained was the beast. But he also wrote of regret, of memories that haunted him more than any ghost, of a woman he had loved and lost, whose face he could no longer recall clearly, whose name he whispered into the darkness knowing she would never answer. The final entry was dated more than 200 years ago. It was short, only a few lines. I have tried everything. Prayer, penance, starvation, fire. Nothing ends it. Nothing cleanses me. So I will sleep. I will bind myself with silver and sacred herbs and descend into the deepest part of this cursed place. Perhaps the sleep will be eternal. Perhaps I will finally know peace. If anyone reads this, know that I was a man once. I was human once. And I am sorry. Elara closed the journal slowly, her mind reeling. This was not the monster of legend. This was something far more tragic. She stood and looked around the library, at the books that had been read and annotated, at the desk where he had sat and written his confession. He had not been destroyed. He had not been slain by a hero or a hunter. He had imprisoned himself, seeking an escape from his own existence. She had to find him. Not to kill him, not to claim some trophy or prove the legends true, but to see for herself, to understand. The codex could wait. This was more important. Elara took the journal and left the library, retracing her steps down the corridor and the staircase. The castle felt different now, less menacing and more mournful. She searched the lower levels, moving through kitchens and storerooms and passages that led deeper underground. The air grew colder, damper. The walls wept moisture, and then she found the door. It was iron, set into the stone, marked with crosses and sigils meant to bind and contain. She pulled it open, and a narrow staircase spiraled down into absolute darkness. Elara descended slowly, one hand on the wall, the lantern held high in the other. The stairs seemed to go on forever, down and down until she lost all sense of how deep she had gone. And then the staircase ended, opening into a vast crypt. Stone coffins lined the walls, some cracked and open, others sealed shut. Candles stood in niches, their wax melted into stalactites, and in the center of the crypt, on a raised platform, lay a single stone sarcophagus. She approached it slowly, her breath visible in the frigid air. The lid was carved with a coat of arms, a dragon coiled around a cross. She set the lantern down and pushed at the lid. It was heavy, but it moved, grinding against stone as she shoved it aside inch by inch. When the gap was wide enough, she looked inside. He lay as if sleeping, his body perfectly preserved, untouched by decay. He was tall, his frame still powerful despite the centuries. His face was pale, almost translucent, but beautiful in a way that was both human and utterly alien. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, dark hair that fell across his forehead. His hands were crossed over his chest, bound with silver chains that had burned deep marks into his skin. Dried flowers were scattered around him, their petals crumbling to dust. He wore black, simple and unadorned, and his expression was one of profound sorrow. Elara stared at him, this creature who had terrorized nations, who had drunk the blood of thousands, who had written in his journal that he wanted only to be human again. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his face. His skin was cold as marble, but it was skin, not stone. She could see faint veins beneath the surface. She could see the shadow of a beard along his jaw. And she felt something she had not expected. Compassion. Not pity, not sympathy, but true compassion, the kind that reaches across the divide between self and other, that recognizes suffering and responds without thought of cost. She leaned down, close enough to feel the absence of breath, close enough to see every detail of his frozen features. And then, without understanding why, without questioning the impulse, she pressed her lips to his. For a moment nothing happened. The crypt was silent. The world was still. And then she felt it. A tremor, faint but undeniable, running through the body beneath her. She pulled back, her heart hammering, and watched as his chest rose just slightly, then fell. Rose again. His lips parted, and a sound escaped, soft and raw, something between a gasp and a groan. The silver chains began to smoke, the metal hissing as if heated from within. His eyes opened. They were red, glowing in the darkness, inhuman and terrible. But they were also confused, lost, as if waking from a dream too long and too deep. His gaze found hers, and for a moment they simply stared at each other, woman and vampire, mortal and immortal, separated by everything except the single act of impossible kindness that had bridged the gap. Then his hand moved, lifting slowly, the chains falling away as if they had lost their power. He reached for her, his fingers brushing her cheek, and his voice, hoarse from centuries of silence, spoke a single word. Who? Elara did not run. She did not scream. She met his gaze and answered, her voice steady despite the terror and wonder coursing through her. My name is Elara, and I think I just made a terrible mistake. The Count sat up slowly, his movements stiff as if his body had forgotten how to obey his will. The chains fell away completely, clattering against the stone floor of the sarcophagus, leaving behind raw burns that marked his wrists and forearms like brands. He stared at them for a long moment, then at Elara, then around the crypt as if trying to remember where he was and why. His eyes, still burning with that unnatural red light, moved constantly, taking in details, searching for threats or answers, or both. Elara remained perfectly still, her hand still resting on the edge of the sarcophagus, her body tense, but not fleeing. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to put as much distance as possible between herself and the creature she had just awakened. But a deeper instinct, the one that had driven her across Europe and into this forsaken place, kept her rooted. She had come seeking knowledge. She had come seeking truth. And now she stood face to face with the most profound mystery of all. The Count turned his gaze back to her, and this time his eyes focused with more clarity. The red glow began to fade, replaced by something darker, deeper, almost human. He studied her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see not just her features but everything beneath them, every thought and fear and secret hope. When he spoke again, his voice was stronger, though still rough from disuse. You should not be here. This place is death. Elara found her voice, forcing it to remain steady. I know what this place is. I came here by choice. He tilted his head slightly, a gesture that might have been curiosity or confusion. His hand, still raised from touching her cheek, slowly lowered to his lap. He looked down at his own body as if seeing it for the first time, at the black clothing now dusty and worn, at the silver burns that were already beginning to heal, the flesh knitting together before her eyes. "How long?" he asked, and there was something raw in the question, something that made him sound less like a monster and more like a man waking from surgery, disoriented and vulnerable. "How long have I been here?" Elara reached into her satchel and carefully pulled out his journal. She held it up so he could see it. "According to your last entry, 237 years. His eyes locked onto the journal, and something flickered across his face. Recognition. Pain. Shame. He reached for it, his movements hesitant, and she placed it in his hands. He opened it, turning to the last page, and read his own words in silence. His jaw tightened. His fingers gripped the leather cover hard enough that she heard it creak. "I remember writing this," he said quietly. "I remember the silver burning my skin as I wound the chains myself. I remember the herbs I gathered, the prayers I spoke even though I knew they would not save me. I remember lying down in this coffin and willing myself to never wake. And yet here I am." He looked at her again, and this time there was something almost accusatory in his gaze. "Why did you wake me? What madness possessed you to do such a thing?" Elara met his eyes without flinching. "I read your journal. I saw what you wrote. You were not the monster the legends describe. You were a man in pain, seeking escape from something you could not control. I felt compassion for that." "Compassion," he repeated, and the word sounded strange in his mouth, as if he had not heard it spoken aloud in centuries. "You felt compassion for me. Do you know what I am? Do you know what I have done?" "I know the stories," Elara said. "I know the history. But I also know that you imprisoned yourself, rather than continue killing. That means something." The Count laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed through the crypt. "It means nothing. I imprisoned myself because I was a coward, because I could not bear what I had become but lacked the courage to end my existence completely. Do not mistake despair for virtue." He stood suddenly, rising from the sarcophagus with a speed that made Elara step back instinctively. He was taller than she had realized, towering over her, his presence filling the space in a way that was both physical and something else, something that pressed against her mind and made the air feel heavier. He moved past her, walking toward the center of the crypt, his steps unsteady at first, but growing more confident with each stride. He stopped in front of one of the candles, staring at the melted wax, as if it held some meaning. "I can feel it already," he said, his voice low. "The hunger. It wakes with me. It always does. 200 years of sleep and it is as sharp as the day I first felt it. Sharper, perhaps, because it has been denied so long." Elara's heart was pounding now, but she forced herself to speak calmly. "Can you control it?" He turned to look at her, and for the first time she saw something that might have been amusement in his expression, though it was dark and joyless. "Control it? No. Delay it, perhaps. Resist it for a time. But control it? Never. That is the nature of the curse. The hunger is always there, always waiting, and eventually it consumes everything else." "Then why did you wake?" Elara asked. "If the hunger is inevitable, if you cannot control it, why did my kiss break the binding? You should have remained asleep." The Count was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful, almost puzzled. "I do not know. The silver should have held. The herbs were blessed. The words I spoke were words of binding, old words that carry power. And yet when your lips touched mine, something broke. Not the chains. Those fell away after. Something inside me. A barrier I had constructed. A wall between what I was and what I chose to become. You reached through it without knowing it was there." Elara took a tentative step closer. "What do you mean?" He looked at her, and his eyes were fully human now, dark and haunted. "I have not been touched in kindness since before my transformation. Every hand raised to me has been raised in violence or fear or calculation. But you touched me with compassion. You kissed me not out of desire or duty or some foolish belief that it would grant you power, but because you looked at a creature deserving of damnation and felt sorrow for its suffering. That kind of touch is rare. It is the kind of thing that can break even the strongest binding, because bindings are built on hatred and fear and despair. You offered the opposite. Elara felt something shift in her chest, a strange mixture of awe and terror. She had not planned this. She had not understood what she was doing. It had been an impulse, nothing more, but it had changed everything. "What happens now?" she asked. The Count walked back toward her, stopping a few feet away, close enough that she could see the details of his face more clearly. Up close, he looked younger than she had expected, perhaps no more than 40 when he had been turned, though his eyes held the weight of centuries. He studied her with that same intensity, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Now," he said slowly, "I must decide what to do with you. You have awakened me, whether you intended to or not. You have seen my face, read my words, learned my secrets. You know where I sleep, you know what I am. There are only two logical choices. I can kill you, quickly and mercifully, before the hunger grows too strong. Or I can let you go and trust that you will not bring hunters or priests or an army to finish what they failed to do centuries ago." Elara lifted her chin, refusing to show the fear that was coiling in her stomach. "Or there is a third choice. You could let me stay." The Count's expression shifted, surprise breaking through the carefully controlled mask. "Stay here with me. You would choose that willingly." Elara gestured toward the journal still clutched in his hand. "You wrote that you wanted to be human again, that you regretted what you had become. Maybe I can help you. Maybe there is a way to break the curse, not just to sleep through it, but to truly end it. I have spent 10 years studying texts about the undead, about the rituals and bindings and transformations. I came here looking for the Codex of Eternal Night, but what I found is more important. I found you, and I think there is still something human in you, something worth saving." The Count stared at her for a long time, his face unreadable. Then he shook his head slowly. "You are a fool. A brave fool, but a fool nonetheless. There is no salvation for creatures like me. The Church has tried, alchemists have tried, I myself have tried, and all of it failed. The curse is absolute." "Maybe," Elara said, "or maybe no one has tried the right way. Let me stay, let me help you. If I am wrong, if there truly is no hope, then you can kill me then. But give me the chance to try." The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. The Count's jaw worked as if he were fighting some internal battle. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you stay, you will see things that will haunt you. You will witness what I am capable of when the hunger takes hold. You will learn that compassion, no matter how pure, cannot erase centuries of blood. And you will likely die, either by my hand or by the hand of those who hunt me." Elara nodded. "I understand the risks." "Do you?" he asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. "Do you truly understand what you are agreeing to? Or is this some romantic notion, some story you have told yourself about redemption and sacrifice?" "It is not romantic," Elara said quietly. "It is necessary, because if there is even the smallest chance that you can be saved, then it is worth the risk, and because no one should have to face eternity alone." The Count closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked unbearably weary, as if the weight of every year he had lived was pressing down on him all at once. When he opened them again, the red glow had returned, faint but present, a reminder of what he was beneath the fragile humanity. "Very well," he said. "You may stay, but know this, I will not be gentle with you. I will not pretend to be something I am not, and if the hunger becomes too great, I will not hesitate. Your compassion will not save you when that moment comes." Elara felt a chill run through her, but she did not back down. "I understand." The Count turned away from her, walking back toward the sarcophagus. He picked up one of the silver chains, letting it dangle from his fingers, the metal still smoking slightly where it touched his skin. He looked at it with something like nostalgia. "There are rules if you are to remain here," he said. "You will not leave the castle without my permission. You will not attempt to contact the outside world. You will not enter certain rooms, and I will tell you which ones. And you will never, under any circumstances, try to bind me again. If I sense that you are attempting any form of ritual or incantation meant to control me, I will end your life before you can finish the first word." Elara nodded, agreed. He dropped the chain, and it clattered against the stone floor. "Good. Then follow me. If you are to stay, you will need quarters. This crypt is no place for the living." He walked toward the staircase, and after a moment's hesitation, Elara followed. As they climbed the spiral stairs, leaving the darkness of the crypt behind, she realized that her life had just changed in ways she could not yet comprehend. She had come seeking knowledge, seeking the Codex, seeking answers to questions that had consumed her for years. Instead, she had found something far more dangerous and far more important. She had found a cursed soul who still believed, deep down, that there might be a way back to humanity, and she had made a promise to help him find it, no matter the cost. Behind them, the candles in the crypt began to gutter and die one by one, until only darkness remained. The room the Count led her to was in the western tower, far from the crypt, but still deep within the castle's heart. It had once been a lady's chamber. Elara could tell from the remnants of elegance that clung to it like fading perfume. A canopy bed stood against one wall, its curtains moth-eaten, but still bearing traces of embroidered roses. A wardrobe of dark wood leaned slightly to one side, its mirror cracked down the middle. A writing desk sat near the window, and when Elara approached it, she found quills still resting in their holder, dried ink crusted in a crystal well. The Count stood in the doorway, not entering. The threshold seemed to hold him back, as if some invisible line separated his world from this one. He watched as she explored the space, his expression unreadable. "This was my wife's room," he said quietly. "Before." Elara turned to face him, her hand resting on the back of the desk chair. Before what? Before everything. Before the wars, before the betrayals, before the transformation. She died in this room, fevered and calling my name. And I was 300 miles away defending a border that no longer exists against an enemy that no longer matters. When I returned, they had already buried her. I never saw her face again. He paused, and something flickered across his features, grief so old and so deep that it had calcified into part of his very being. I kept this room exactly as it was. For decades I would come here and sit in that chair and pretend she was only sleeping in the next room, and then I stopped coming, because the pretending hurt more than the emptiness. But I never let anyone else use it. It has been sealed for 2 centuries. "Why give it to me now?" Elara asked softly. "Because," the Count said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you remind me of her, not in appearance. She was dark where you are fair, tall where you are not. But in the way you look at the world, she believed in things, in goodness and purpose and the possibility of change. She believed in me, even when I gave her every reason not to. You have that same dangerous faith." Elara felt the weight of his words settle over her. It was not a compliment, she realized. It was a warning. But she did not flinch from it. Instead, she moved to the bed and sat on its edge, testing the mattress. It was surprisingly solid, the frame sturdy despite its age. "What was her name?" she asked. The Count was silent for so long that she thought he would not answer. Then he spoke, and the name came out like a prayer. "Elisabetta." Elara nodded, committing the name to memory. "I will honor her space." The Count inclined his head slightly. "There is a washroom through that door. The plumbing no longer functions, but there are basins and pitchers. I will have water brought up. You will find clothing in the wardrobe, though it is old and may not fit well. Make do as best you can." He turned to leave, but Elara called after him. "Wait. What about you? Where will you be?" He looked back at her, and in the dim light his features seemed sharper, more angular, less human. "I will be where I always am when the sun rises, in the darkness, away from the light that would destroy me. Do not attempt to find me during the day. The castle is dangerous in daylight, not because of me, but because of what daylight reveals, rot and decay and structural failures that darkness hides. Stay in this wing. Do not wander." "And at night?" Elara asked. "What happens at night?" "At night," he said, his eyes catching the lantern light and reflecting it back like an animal's, "at night you will see what I am, and you will begin to understand what you have agreed to." He left without another word, his footsteps fading down the corridor until there was only silence. Elara sat alone in the dead woman's room, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that had ended centuries before she was born, and wondered if she had made the right choice. But it was too late for doubt now. She had crossed the threshold, literally and figuratively. Whatever came next, she would face it. She rose and went to the wardrobe, opening it carefully. Inside hung several dresses, their fabric surprisingly intact, preserved by the dry air and the sealed room. She pulled one out, a deep burgundy gown with long sleeves and a high collar, embroidered with gold thread in patterns that might have been flowers or might have been something more arcane. It was too long for her, the hem dragging on the floor, but otherwise it fit well enough. She changed out of her travel-worn clothes, folding them neatly and setting them aside. As promised, water appeared while she was examining the contents of the desk. She had not heard anyone approach, had not heard the door open, but when she turned around, a pewter pitcher and basin sat on the washstand, steam rising gently from the water. It unnerved her, this silent service, but she used the water gratefully, washing away days of travel and the dust of the crypt. Night deepened outside the window. The moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across the mountains. Elara stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the landscape that had terrified so many for so long. From here it looked almost peaceful, the forests dark and still, the village lights distant pinpricks far below. She could understand why someone might choose to live here, isolated from the world, answerable to no one. A sound made her turn. The Count stood in the doorway again, though she had not heard him approach. He had changed as well, trading his dusty black clothes for others that looked newer. A long coat over a white shirt, both in the style of a century past. His hair was tied back, revealing the full severity of his features. But it was his eyes that held her attention. They were red again, glowing faintly, and there was a tension in his posture that had not been there before. "It is time," he said. "Time for what?" Elara asked, though she thought she knew. "For you to see. Come with me." He did not wait for her agreement, simply turned and walked away. Elara followed, her heart beating faster, her hands clenched at her sides. They descended through the castle, down corridors she had not explored, past rooms that breathed with malevolence. The Count moved with absolute confidence, never hesitating, never glancing back to see if she followed. He knew she would, he knew she had to. They emerged into the courtyard and Elara stopped, her breath catching. The fountain at its center was flowing now, water pouring from the mouth of a stone dragon, but the water was not clear. It ran red, thick and viscous, and the smell of copper filled the air. The thorny vines had come alive, writhing slowly, their thorns gleaming like teeth, and around the edges of the courtyard, shapes moved in the shadows, low to the ground, eyes reflecting the moonlight. The Count stood at the center of it all, his arms spread slightly, his head tilted back as if drinking in the night itself. When he spoke, his voice carried a resonance that made the stones vibrate. "This is my domain. This is what I rule. Not through conquest or decree, but through fear and blood and the weight of centuries. The creatures you see in the shadows are mine. The wolves, the bats, the crawling things that shun the light. They obey me because I am their king, the first and the greatest of the damned." As if on cue, a wolf emerged from the shadows. It was massive, easily twice the size of any natural wolf, its fur black as pitch, its eyes the same burning red as the Count's. It approached him slowly, head low, and when it reached him, it pressed its muzzle against his hand. He stroked it absently, his gaze still on Elara. "This is Varg," he said. "He has been with me for 300 years, bound to me by blood and magic. He is loyal, obedient, and utterly merciless. If I commanded him to tear out your throat, he would do so without hesitation." Elara stood frozen, watching the enormous wolf, feeling the weight of the Count's words. But she did not run. She did not even step back. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because," the Count said, releasing the wolf and walking toward her, "you need to understand what you are dealing with. You came here with compassion, with hope, with the naive belief that there is something in me worth saving. But look around you. This is what I am. This is what I have built. A kingdom of monsters in a castle of the damned. Your compassion cannot change this. Your hope cannot erase it." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the unnatural cold radiating from his body, close enough to see the sharp points of his canines when he spoke. "I am showing you this," he continued, "so that when the time comes, when I lose control and the hunger takes over, You will remember what I tried to tell you. You will remember that I warned you, and perhaps, if you survive, you will not blame me for what I cannot help but do." Elara met his gaze, forcing herself not to look away despite the fear clawing at her chest. "I understand what you are. I understood it before I came here. But I also understand that you are standing here talking to me, warning me instead of simply killing me. That means something. It means I am delaying the inevitable," the Count said. "Nothing more." "Then delay it longer," Elara said. "Let me try to help you. You said there is no salvation, but have you truly explored every possibility? Have you searched every text, every ritual, every fragment of knowledge that might exist?" "I have searched for centuries," he said, his voice hard. "I have read books that would drive lesser minds to madness. I have performed rituals that required sacrifices you cannot imagine. I have prayed to gods I no longer believe in. All of it was futile." "Then let me search," Elara said, "with fresh eyes, with new perspective. You have lived with this curse so long that perhaps you cannot see what someone from outside might see. Let me read your books. Let me study your journals. Let me try." The Count stared at her, and for a moment something shifted in his expression. The hardness cracked just slightly, and beneath it she glimpsed something that might have been hope, desperate and painful, and quickly suppressed. "You are persistent," he said finally. "I will grant you that. Very well, you may use the library, you may read whatever you find there, but I make no promises, and I give you 1 month. If in 1 month you have found nothing, if you have no path forward, no ritual or cure or even a theory worth pursuing, then you will leave. I will escort you to the village, give you gold for your passage home, and we will never speak of this again. And if I find something," Elara asked, "if I find even a hint of a possibility." The Count's expression was unreadable. "Then we will see. But do not hope for miracles. I have long since learned that miracles are for the innocent, and I lost my innocence the moment I chose damnation over death." He turned away from her, moving toward the castle entrance. The Wolfvarg followed at his heels, and the other creatures in the shadows began to disperse, melting back into the darkness. Elara stood alone in the courtyard, the red fountain still flowing beside her, and she realized that she had just been given both a chance and a deadline. 1 month to find what the Count himself had failed to find in centuries. 1 month to prove that compassion was more than just a fleeting emotion, that it could be the foundation of real change. She looked up at the moon, full and cold and indifferent, and made a silent vow. She would find something. She had to. Because if she failed, it would not just be her life at stake. It would be the Count's last chance at redemption, and the confirmation of his belief that he was beyond saving. Elara walked back into the castle, her steps echoing in the empty halls, and began to plan. She had 1 month. She would not waste a single night. The days blurred together in a strange rhythm that Elara had never experienced before. She slept when exhaustion finally claimed her, often in the library itself, her head resting on ancient texts, ink staining her fingers. She woke to find bread and cheese and wine waiting on the desk, brought by invisible hands while she slept. The Count never appeared during daylight hours, and she honored his warning, staying within the western wing and the library, never venturing toward the places where he might be hiding from the sun. But at night, he came to her, always in the library, always silent until he chose to speak. He would appear in the doorway or beside a bookshelf or standing at the window, and Elara would look up from her reading to find him watching her with those dark, haunted eyes. Sometimes he asked what she had found. Sometimes he simply stood there, a shadow among shadows, as if her presence alone provided some comfort he would not name. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Elara's initial optimism began to fray at the edges. The library was vast, containing texts in dozens of languages, many of which she could not read. She found grimoires of dark magic, chronicles of vampire lineages, testimonies of hunters and priests and scholars who had encountered the undead. She found rituals of binding and banishment, recipes for holy water strengthened with rare herbs, prayers in dead languages meant to drive back the night, but nothing that spoke of a cure, nothing that offered true transformation from vampire back to human. The Count had been right. Centuries of knowledge, and all of it focused on destruction or containment, never salvation. On the 21st night, Elara sat at the desk with her head in her hands, surrounded by books she had pulled from every corner of the library. Her eyes burned, her mind felt sluggish, and for the first time since arriving at the castle, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that she might fail. "You should rest." She looked up to find the Count standing beside the fireplace, his face half illuminated by the flames. He had been there for some time, she realized, watching her work herself to exhaustion. His expression was softer than usual, almost concerned. "I cannot rest," Elara said, her voice hoarse. "I have 1 week left. 1 week to find something, anything, and I have nothing." The Count moved closer, pulling a chair from the corner and sitting across from her. It was the first time he had sat in her presence, the first time he had positioned himself at her level, rather than looming over her. The gesture felt significant, though she could not say why. "You have worked harder than anyone I have ever known," he said quietly. "You have read texts that would have broken most scholars. You have pursued this quest with a dedication that borders on obsession. But perhaps it is time to accept that some things cannot be changed." Elara shook her head stubbornly. "I do not accept that. There has to be something. The curse was created through a ritual, through choice and magic and blood. If it was created, it can be undone." The Count leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "I admire your logic, but you are missing a crucial element. The curse was not simply placed upon me. I invited it. I called out to the darkness in my moment of greatest despair and rage, and the darkness answered. I made a bargain, Elara. I traded my humanity for power, my soul for immortality. That is not a spell that can be broken with herbs and prayers. It is a contract written in blood and sealed with damnation. Then we break the contract, Elara said. Every contract has terms. Every bargain has conditions. And what do you think those conditions are? The Count asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. What would satisfy the darkness that gave me this power? What payment would be sufficient to void the agreement? Elara was silent, her mind racing. She had not thought of it in those terms before, had not considered the curse as a transaction with terms that might be negotiated, but now that he had spoken it aloud, it made a terrible kind of sense. What did you promise? She asked. When you made the bargain, what exactly did you offer? The Count's expression darkened. Everything. I offered everything. My life, my death, my service, my loyalty. I swore to be the darkness's instrument, to spread fear and feed on the innocent, to be a scourge upon the world of light. And in return I was given strength beyond mortal limits, immortality, dominion over creatures of the night. It seemed fair at the time. I was dying, bleeding out on a battlefield, watching my enemies celebrate over my broken body. The darkness whispered that I could rise again, that I could have vengeance, that I could become something they would fear for all eternity. I said yes without hesitation. And have you kept your end of the bargain? Elara asked carefully. Have you been the darkness's instrument? The Count looked away, staring into the fire. For centuries, yes, I killed without mercy. I terrorized nations. I built an empire of fear that stretched from the Carpathians to the Black Sea. I was everything the darkness wanted me to be. But then something changed. The rage that had fueled me began to fade. The vengeance I sought lost its meaning when everyone I had hated was long dead and forgotten. And I began to remember what it felt like to be human, to feel guilt, to feel sorrow, to want something other than blood and power. When did you stop? Elara asked. When did you stop keeping the bargain? The Count turned back to her, and his eyes were no longer glowing. They were simply dark, human, filled with centuries of accumulated pain. The last time I killed was 73 years before I sealed myself in that crypt. A girl no more than 16 lost in the forest. She stumbled into the castle seeking shelter from a storm. I could have sent her away. I could have pointed her toward the village and let her go. But the hunger was strong and I was weak. I drained her, every drop, and when it was done I carried her body to the forest and laid her beneath the trees as if she had simply fallen asleep. And I looked at her face, peaceful in death, and I realized I could not do this anymore. I could not be this anymore. He paused, his hands gripping the arms of the chair hard enough that the wood creaked. So I stopped. I imprisoned myself. I chose silence over service. And by doing so, I broke my end of the bargain. Which means the darkness still has a claim on me. It can call me back at any time. It can force me to honor the contract I have violated. That is why I do not believe there is a cure. Because the cure would require the darkness to release me, and the darkness does not forgive broken oaths. Elara leaned forward, her exhaustion forgotten, her mind suddenly sharp and focused. But what if the darkness does not have to release you? What if there is another way? You said you offered everything. Your life, your death, your service. What if you could give back what you took? What if you could undo the damage? Repay the debt? The Count shook his head. I have killed thousands. How does one repay that debt? How does one undo centuries of suffering? Not by trying to reverse what has already been done, Elara said, her words coming faster now as the idea took shape, but by offering something of equal value going forward. You were meant to be an instrument of darkness. What if you became an instrument of something else? What if you used your power, your immortality, your strength, not to spread fear, but to protect, to defend, to stand between the darkness and those who cannot stand against it themselves? The Count stared at her, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked genuinely shocked. You are suggesting I become some kind of guardian, a protector, after everything I have done? Why not, Elara said. The darkness gave you power to spread fear. Use that same power to fight fear. The darkness made you immortal so you could terrorize generations. Use that immortality to defend generations. It is not redemption through suffering or prayer. It is redemption through purpose, through choosing, every night, to be something other than what you were made to be. The Count rose from his chair, pacing to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The idea was absurd, impossible, and yet it resonated with something deep inside him, something he had thought long dead. He had spent 2 centuries in darkness trying to escape what he was, but what if escape was not the answer? What if transformation was? Even if I agreed, he said slowly, even if I chose this path, it would not break the curse. I would still be a vampire. I would still need blood to survive. I would still be bound to the night. Yes, Elara said, rising as well and moving to stand beside him. But you would be choosing what to do with that existence. You would be defining yourself, not letting the darkness define you. And perhaps, over time, if you prove yourself, if you truly change what you are at your core, the contract will weaken. The darkness will lose its hold because you will no longer be serving its purpose. And what if it does not work? The Count asked. What if I change my path, commit myself to this impossible task, and the curse remains as strong as ever? What if the hunger grows too great and I fail? What if I hurt someone I am trying to protect? Then you fail, Elara said simply, but at least you will have tried. At least you will have died, truly died, as something other than a monster. Is that not better than spending eternity in darkness, alone and unchanging, waiting for the end that never comes? The Count turned to look at her, and something in his expression had shifted. The despair was still there, the weight of centuries, but beneath it was something new, something fragile and tentative but undeniably present. Hope. You are either the wisest person I have ever met, he said quietly, or the most foolish. I have not yet decided which. Perhaps I am both, Elara said with a slight smile. But will you try? Will you give me this last week to find the rituals and texts that might support this path? And if I can show you that it is possible, will you choose it? The Count was silent for a long time, staring out at the moonlit mountains, at the forest where he had hunted and killed for so long. Finally he spoke, his voice so low she almost did not hear it. I will try, not because I believe it will work, but because you have given me something I have not had in so long, I had forgotten what it felt like. You have given me a reason to try. Elara felt something tight in her chest loosen, just slightly. It was not victory. It was not even certainty. But it was a beginning. Then we have 1 week, she said. 1 week to prepare. 1 week to find the right path. And then we begin. The Count nodded slowly. 1 week. And then we see if compassion truly is stronger than damnation. He left her then, disappearing into the shadows of the castle, and Elara returned to the desk, to the books and scrolls and texts she had been studying, but now she was looking for something different. Not a cure, not an escape, but a purpose, a way to transform darkness into light, even if the transformation was never complete. She worked through the night, and for the first time in weeks she did not feel hopeless. She felt something far more dangerous. She felt determined. The final week passed in a flurry of preparation and discovery. Elara found texts she had overlooked before, rituals of oath-taking and purpose-binding that had been used by ancient orders of knights and priests. She found prayers not of banishment, but of consecration, words meant to sanctify weapons and armor for holy purpose. And she found, in a journal written by a monk who had studied the undead for 40 years, a single line that gave her hope. The curse binds the will to darkness, but will itself cannot be bound. Choice remains always, even in damnation. She showed the Count everything she found. Together they studied the texts, debated interpretations, considered possibilities. He was skeptical, always, but he engaged with the work. He offered insights from his own centuries of experience, pointed out flaws in her reasoning, suggested alternatives, and slowly, gradually, something began to shift between them. They were no longer captor and prisoner, monster and victim. They were collaborators, allies, perhaps even something more, though neither spoke of it aloud. On the final night of the month, Elara prepared the ritual chamber. It was a small room off the library, one the Count had not entered in decades. She cleared away dust and debris, arranged candles in a circle, placed symbols of protection and purpose at the cardinal points. She filled a chalice with wine mixed with herbs she had found growing in the castle gardens, plants that had once been used in ceremonies of knighthood, and she waited. The Count arrived at midnight. He stood in the doorway looking at what she had created, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then he entered, moving slowly, as if the symbols on the floor might burn him, but they did not. They were not meant to repel. They were meant to consecrate. "Are you certain you wish to do this?" Elara asked. "Once we begin, there is no turning back. You will be bound by oath to the purpose you choose. If you break that oath, the consequences will be severe, more severe than damnation," the Count asked with a slight, bitter smile. "More severe than eternity as a monster." "Perhaps," Elara said seriously, "because this time you will be choosing freely, consciously, with full knowledge of what you are agreeing to. The darkness claimed you when you were dying and desperate. This oath will claim you when you are clear-minded and willing. That makes it stronger, more binding, more real." The Count nodded slowly. "I understand, and I choose it anyway. Better to be bound by purpose than by emptiness." Elara gestured to the center of the circle, then kneel. He did so, sinking to his knees on the stone floor, his head bowed. Elara moved to stand before him, the chalice in her hands. She had spent the last 3 days memorizing the words, practicing the ritual until she could perform it without hesitation. Now, with the Count kneeling before her, with the weight of everything they were attempting pressing down on her, she felt the enormity of the moment. She began to speak, her voice steady and clear. The words a mixture of Latin and Romanian, ancient phrases of consecration adapted for this impossible purpose. She spoke of choice and will and the power of transformation. She spoke of darkness turned to light, of strength used in defense of the weak, of immortality dedicated to the protection of mortal life. And as she spoke, she saw something begin to happen. The candles flared brighter. The symbols on the floor began to glow, faint but visible, as if lit from within. And the Count himself changed. His skin, always pale, seemed to grow luminous. His eyes, which had been dark, began to reflect the candlelight like mirrors. He was still a vampire. He was still cursed. But something fundamental was shifting, something deeper than flesh or blood. Elara lifted the chalice, holding it out to him. "Drink, and with this act, bind yourself to the oath you have chosen, to protect the innocent, to stand against the darkness, to use your power not for destruction but for preservation, to be, for as long as you exist, a guardian of those who cannot guard themselves." The Count raised his head, looking up at her. His hands, when he reached for the chalice, were trembling. He took it from her carefully, as if it were made of glass, and brought it to his lips. He drank, slowly, draining the entire contents, and when he lowered the chalice, his expression was one of profound solemnity. "I swear it," he said, his voice resonating in the small chamber. "By blood and will and the remnants of my soul, I swear to honor this oath. I will protect the innocent. I will stand against the darkness, even the darkness within myself. I will use my strength to defend, my immortality to endure, my knowledge to guide. And if I fail, if I break this oath, may what remains of my humanity be stripped away completely. May I become the true monster I have always feared, unable to hide behind excuses or sleep or self-imposed exile. This I swear." The moment the words left his lips, the candles exploded with light, burning so bright that Elara had to shield her eyes. The symbols on the floor blazed like fire, and the air in the room crackled with energy. The Count threw his head back, his body rigid, and for a terrible moment Elara thought she had killed him, that the ritual had been too much, that he was being torn apart from the inside. But then the light faded, slowly, gradually, until only the gentle glow of the candles remained. The symbols on the floor dimmed back to faint markings, and the Count remained kneeling, alive, unchanged in appearance, but fundamentally different in some way Elara could not quite name. He looked up at her, and his eyes were clear. Not glowing, not haunted, simply clear, present, aware. He rose slowly to his feet, testing his body as if expecting it to feel different. When he spoke, his voice was filled with wonder. "I can feel it. The hunger is still there, but it is muted, distant. And there is something else. Something I have not felt in so long I had forgotten it existed. Purpose, direction, a reason beyond mere survival." Elara felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Is the oath holding? Do you feel bound by it?" The Count nodded. "I do. It is not a physical binding, not chains or compulsion, but I know with absolute certainty that if I break this oath, the consequences will be catastrophic. Not just for me, but for everything I might have protected. That knowledge is more powerful than any chain." "Then it worked," Elara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We did it." The Count looked at her for a long moment, and then, slowly, deliberately, he knelt again. But this time it was not in supplication, it was in respect. He took her hand in both of his touch cold but gentle, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "You have given me what I thought was impossible, not freedom from the curse, but freedom to choose what to do with it. You have given me hope, purpose, and a path forward. I do not know if I can truly be redeemed. I do not know if I can ever repay the debt of blood I owe, but I will spend every night of my existence trying. This I promise you." Elara felt the tears fall now, unable to stop them. She had done what she came to do. She had found the answer, not in ancient texts or forgotten rituals, but in the simple truth that every soul, no matter how damned, still possessed the capacity to choose, and the Count had chosen. She gently freed her hand from his and helped him to his feet. "We should test it. You should hunt, but this time not for prey, for threats. There are bandits in these mountains, criminals who prey on travelers. There are creatures, natural and unnatural, that threaten the villages. Start there. Protect those who need protection, and see if the oath holds." The Count nodded. "I will. But first I must ask you something. Will you stay, not as my prisoner or even as my guest, but as my counsel, as the one who reminds me of my purpose when the hunger grows strong, as the voice that keeps me human even when humanity seems impossible?" Elara had known this question was coming, had felt it building over the weeks they had worked together, and she had already made her decision, though it terrified her. "I will stay," she said, "for as long as you need me, for as long as I can help, but on one condition. You must teach me everything you know about the undead, about the darkness, about the magic that binds this world. Because if we are going to do this, if we are going to change what it means to be cursed, then I need to understand it fully, and perhaps together we can find others like you, others who want to choose a different path." The Count smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his entire face, making him look younger, almost human. "You are an extraordinary woman, Elara. Very well, I accept your condition. I will teach you, and in return, you will keep me honest. You will be my conscience, my anchor, my reminder of why I choose this difficult path." They stood together in the ritual chamber, vampire and mortal, bound now by something deeper than fear or obligation. They were bound by choice, by shared purpose, by the dangerous and fragile hope that even the damned could find redemption if they were willing to fight for it. In the nights that followed, the Count began his new work. He hunted the bandits that plagued the mountain roads, driving them away or delivering them to the authorities in the valley. He protected travelers who ventured too close to dangerous places. He used his power over wolves and bats to drive away threats, to warn villagers of coming danger, to be the guardian he had sworn to become. And with each night, the oath grew stronger. The hunger grew more manageable. The darkness that had owned him for so long began to loosen its grip, just slightly, just enough to matter. Elara remained at the castle, studying the texts, learning the secrets the Count had accumulated over centuries. She wrote everything down, creating a record that might help others, that might offer hope to those who thought themselves beyond saving. And at night, when the Count returned from his work, they would sit together in the library and discuss what he had done, what he had felt, whether the oath was holding. Months passed, then a year. The villagers below began to notice that the roads were safer, that the wolves no longer attacked, that travelers who had been lost were found and guided to safety. They did not know who or what was protecting them, but they whispered stories of a dark guardian, a shadow that moved through the night keeping watch. Some called it an angel, others called it a ghost. None guessed the truth. And in the castle, two souls continued their work, one learning what it meant to be human again, one night at a time, the other learning what it meant to stand beside the darkness without being consumed by it. They did not speak of love, though it grew between them quietly, inevitably, a bond forged in the fires of transformation and choice. They did not promise forever, because forever was too uncertain, too dangerous to contemplate. But they promised each other today and tomorrow, and every night after that, for as long as the oath held and the darkness allowed. The Count had been right about one thing. There was no cure for the curse. He was still a vampire. He still needed blood, though he found ways to obtain it without killing, arrangements with the villagers who left offerings at the forest edge in exchange for protection. He was still bound to the night, still vulnerable to sunlight and silver and the holy symbols that had once held him at bay. But he was no longer a monster. He was a guardian, and that made all the difference. On a night 2 years after the ritual, Elara stood at the window of what had once been Elisabetta's room and was now her own. The Count stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on the windowsill. They looked out at the mountains, at the village lights below, at the moon rising full and bright over the forest. "Do you ever regret it?" the Count asked quietly. "Choosing to stay, choosing this life?" Elara turned to look at him, at the face she had come to know so well, at the eyes that no longer glowed with hunger but with something warmer, something closer to peace. She smiled. "Never. You gave me what I was searching for. Not the codex, not ancient knowledge, but proof that change is possible, that even in the deepest darkness there is still the capacity for light. How could I regret that?" The Count returned her smile, and in that moment he looked almost human, almost alive, almost saved. It was enough. It had to be enough, because salvation was not a destination but a journey, and they were walking it together, one night at a time, choosing again and again to believe that compassion was stronger than damnation, that purpose was stronger than curse, and that love, even unspoken, could survive in the space between mortality and eternity. They stood together at the window as the night deepened, guardian and counsel, vampire and scholar, two souls bound by an oath and a choice and the quiet, dangerous hope that tomorrow would be better than yesterday. And in the castle that had once been a place of horror and death, there was now something else, something fragile but real. There was life, and there was purpose, and there was the chance, however small, that the darkness could be transformed not through destruction, but through the simple, profound act of choosing to be better than what fate had made you. That was enough. That would always be enough.